Welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larson. This is part 2 of our interview with Jay Davis.
I think there's several things, and this is, I think, one, we over-idolize billionaires. We think that billionaires are like the smartest people in the world. They know everything. And you look at people like Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg is a person. He's smart in some ways, but he also says stupid stuff. Like, I mean, he said...
If you missed part 1, please go back and hear about how his ad agency and his previous work, he's been able to get 200 million views for his clients' videos across YouTube and Facebook and driven 150 million in revenue. And his new Kickstarter for his own idea, they ran a little test last week, and in 48 hours they reached their goal for selling $10,000 of a pillow that's basically a cube for side sleepers. Jay, kind of picking up where we left off at the end of episode 1, when you think about this thing of, the outside perception is that entrepreneurs take risks and they like risk and they're attracted to risk, where, in our perception, really great entrepreneurs are constantly trying to control risk.
Yeah.
And I think when I look at people who wish they were entrepreneurs but can never take the step, I feel like it's like they're trying to avoid risk, where entrepreneurs are trying to take appropriate risk, or they're trying to control risk instead of just avoid it at all costs kind of thing. Yeah. So, in episode 1, we talked about, talking to people about it, creating a crappy prototype, talking to more people about it, making a good prototype. Now you made this, short video, wrote it an hour, filmed it in your own office with your own people and hit your goal. What's next? As you think about this, okay, we've got something people actually like. B, we know that the way we talk about it actually attracts people to part with dollars.
Yeah.
Right? You've confirmed some pretty critical assumptions at a frankly at a smaller scale.
Oh, yeah.
Right? This is not right. As you've seen so many of your clients where they spend a few $100,000 and make a few million, and then the other ones who drink their own Kool-Aid and get wrapped up in their own thing rather than have real feedback and end up wasting money. How do you plan out your next steps? What's next?
Well, I think there's a couple things in there. I think the first thing, just going to risk. I mean, all the things we do in life are risks, and I think that entrepreneurs in many ways just are really good at understanding that they understand that everything's a risk. Like planting a seed is a risk because you might lose that seed. Everything follows that kind of principle of sowing and reaping. If you really want to do something, you got to start somewhere. You got to kind of figure out, how do I start? And so I think that's a challenge for a lot of people, is they're like, hey, how do I... They see entrepreneurs and they want to have that success, but they're unwilling to take any risk. And it's like, as an entrepreneur, I'm constantly taking risk, but I'm always measuring that risk. I'm always kind of asking myself, is this a smart risk? And so for me with PillowCube, our business is successful enough that spending money, spending $5-10 developing an idea isn't crazy for us. We can do that. And it was an appropriate amount of risk for me. It was something I'm like, hey, I can spend some money to just see if this works. Where for someone who's maybe personally spending their own money, maybe $1,000 is kind of their limit. But what I've noticed about entrepreneurship is the risk you need to take to get to the next level will always stretch you. Like, it will always be, I could have gone and done something else. I could have gone and, bought a dirt bike or a side by side, these fun things that we talk about. Like, I could have gone and spent that money on a thing, or I can spend that money on something that will potentially make me a lot of money. And I'm willing to take that risk because I want to find out. And so I think that's an important principle for people, is like, anytime you're hoping to get a huge reward, there is going to be a risk. Some of the people we've been interviewing for this new mini-series, almost all of these entrepreneurs have talked about this, that like, as they level up in their career as an entrepreneur, they take bigger and bigger and bigger risks that are scary still. Like, they still stretch them.
Okay, but we've had a bunch of action sports athletes and on the show, high performers and stuff, right? And one of the things that that makes me think about is you bring up dirt biking, right? I
Yeah.
just got a new dirt bike.
Yep.
I'm stoked to become better at dirt biking, but it's not like, you know, I've been snowboarding since I was a little kid. I've been skateboarding all these years. You know, like all those things that I've got. This is like I've done it enough to know I love it, but I've got a long road ahead of me for mastery to
Yep.
And I think about, you see it in skateboarding, you see it in motocross, or just free riding. Of you get people who they do just the tiniest little bit and they get false confidence, and then they overshoot. You know, it's the guy who, you know, the kid that's never stuck a 3-stair jump, you know, ollie. Right? He's never done a 3-stair ollie, but he thinks he's going to go kickflip a 7-stair.
Yeah.
And that's like, you know, at that level you are getting to like, you know, break your arm kind of stuff. And there's like wipeouts that take people out for weeks from a 7-stair. This doesn't sound like a lot.
Yeah.
But you're, you know, basically jumping your body height in some cases.
And I think that's that key idea of like the stair analogy is like in entrepreneurship, in sports, you need to, don't worry about step 50. Like when you buy your dirt bike, you're not worried about eventually backflipping, you know, over a 40-foot jump. But what is like that step one? And I agree. Like I'm amazed how many times people are scared of entrepreneurship because they're like, well, this friend of mine, you know, just went and got $1 million loan. And it's like, well, that's crazy. Like that's the wrong first step. And so you have to take steps in an order. And so that's any new venture for me, even with PillowCube. I didn't say, let's go drop $200,000 of our money into this because I'm not going to do that. That's stupid. But I am willing to say, hey, what's a reasonable amount that if I lose, it's like, oh, that sucks. That wasn't fun to lose, but it's not going to like ruin my life. And so if you're, you know, a full-time employee and you're saying, hey, I want to do something, I want to start a business, I want to be kind of an entrepreneur in my own life, it's like, well, what's the amount that you can lose, but also stretches you, and spend that amount of money doing your idea. Like, go out and do it. Stop talking about it.
But it's so easy to be objective about other people's plans.
Yeah.
You know, I had a young entrepreneur that I've been advising kind of for free on the side who was running some ideas past me recently, and it was like he would have to quit his job, spend every penny of their family's money. They've got 3 little kids, and borrow. And he's never had anyone give him any money for that at all. It's like it's 100% in his head so far.
Yeah.
I was just like, without trying to force him, I was like really trying to invite him to pump the brakes on that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, can we get some validation here, right? And I can so easily see that for him. And then I'm about to make the same mistake. You know, quickly on the motocross one, because this is a real scenario.
Yeah.
Buddy of mine had a couple bikes. We started riding his dirt bikes together. One of the first times I was ever on a motocross track ever, and he'd been on more than me. We're doing laps and we're doing little jumps and stuff. And somebody's got one of those free ride like X Game jumps, you know, and it wasn't you know, where it's like the metal frame and then there's a big gap and then there's a dirt hill to jump onto, right? And it wasn't the most enormous ones from the X Games, but it was like. It was taller than I was.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like it had to be 8 feet or something.
Yeah.
Right? 8-10 feet, just the metal part. And then there was a good, you know, I would say 20 feet, maybe 16 feet.
Yeah.
From the top of the metal to the top of the to the kind of the crown of the dirt pile, right?
Yeah.
And he goes, "You think I can do that?" And I'm like, "No."
What in your experience makes you think you can do that?
No, like I don't know, man. That's pretty big. That's like, you know, quadruple the biggest thing we've done out here today. At least maybe 5 times the biggest thing we've done out here today. Like, and you know, he's got a powerful 450. You know, that's a big bike, and he's like, "I'm going to do it," and he does it, and he lands it, and he's full of false confidence. He's like, "I'm going to do it again." I'm like, "Dude, that was not a solid jump.
Yeah.
Like, you sure you don't want to like stare, you know, line by line, you know, brick by brick into this? You just going to keep hitting this, like,
yeah,
you know?" And sure enough, the very next one, the very next time, with this false confidence, he pops up and he lands on the top of the dirt, front wheel down, endos. and all I can see is him going headfirst over the hill and the bike like obviously coming to land right on him.
Yeah.
I'm like, we're headed to the hospital.
Yeah.
You know? And so almost like, you know, a lucky win sometimes can sometimes not even be that helpful, right?
And it's funny. I mean, I know a lot of entrepreneurs who had a lucky win, you know, straight out of school,
but accredited it to their
but accredited it
to their
them.
Genius.
Yep.
Right?
And that's and then
which is honestly hard to separate.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I mean, I think that's where, like, I've also met a lot of entrepreneurs who, like, you know, worked really hard on one for 10 years, sold it, and then they're struggling to have that second win. And you know, there's a lot of like, well, am I a good entrepreneur? And so I think that's what's always hard.
It kind of goes back to that Warren Buffett circle of competence thing.
Yeah.
You know, think about the George Clason book from the 50s or whatever, the Richest Man in Babylon.
Yeah.
And he's like, the shield maker gives his buddy money to buy and sell gems to the Phoenicians.
Yeah.
But of course the Phoenicians like take his money and give him colored glass instead. And his mentor's like, you're a shield maker. What made you think that this was a smart thing to put a bunch of money into where you have not stair-stepped into this? You don't. It's not in your circle of competence. And the point is the circle of competence
expands.
It grows, it expands, but it doesn't triple all at once.
Yeah.
Right?
That's where, for me, like, even with PillowCube, I wasn't afraid to do it because we'd done it enough for clients at a much larger scale
to push 2 more feet, to push one level, right?
And so I'd also seen them go, and so it was like, hey, this might be a bad idea, but if I don't do it, I'm always going to be wondering. And it's not an insane risk; it's a reasonable amount of risk. And so I think that's what I think, like you said, people see so much like they approach problems in a very binary black and white way. Like, well, if I'm going to be an entrepreneur, I want to be a big entrepreneur. And it's like, well, there's a lot of things to learn. I mean, just as an example, I think a lot of entrepreneurs feel this pressure to be successful really young. And yet the average successful entrepreneur or CEO started his business in his 40s. And so for me, it's always been like, hey, I got a lot of time. I have to remind some of my employees that.
Well, we all want to be billionaire Zuckerberg before 30.
Yeah, and I have to
remind. And the media tells us that's what success looks like.
Yes, and yet your average entrepreneur's story does not look like that. Most entrepreneurial stories look like people who sometimes go to corporate world for a while, sometimes are able to be in startups in different positions, and then eventually kind of get to a point where it's like, hey, I have a great idea, I'm going after it. I mean, even you look at Jeff Bezos. Like, Jeff Bezos had a great job, and he's been telling this story a lot more. And maybe I've just been reading it more. But he had a great job and went to his boss, who was he says was a great boss, and said, "Hey, you know, I have this idea. What do you think?" And his boss was like, "I wouldn't do it. I don't think so." And Jeff Bezos says, "I knew it would drive me crazy if I didn't know, and B, it was a reasonable amount of risk for me. Like, it wasn't a crazy risk." He's a smart guy. He could get another job. He'd been in the corporate world enough that if it failed miserably, he could probably, you know, go back and get his old job back or another job.
Back to my hero, Warren Buffett, though, of doing things with a margin of safety.
Yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong. At some point, there are going to be these do or die moments. Like,
totally.
that'll come. You don't need to seek them.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to get painted into that corner at some point.
And entrepreneurship is there's always moments
gut check
where you like kind of have that, oh crap, I gotta take this risk to go to the next level, and I think that's sometimes what holds other entrepreneurs back. Like, sometimes we meet entrepreneurs who had a great idea and they're really afraid to put everything on the line again because they're like, well, now I have a business doing $5 million a year and I'm afraid to put all the chips on the table again to get that to a $50 million a year business. And it's like, but that's entrepreneurship. Okay. It's that reasonable risk again.
And you know, it's so easy to sit here and talk about what everybody else has done wrong, right?
Yeah.
The reason I brought up the dirt bike example is because I found, like, I literally, you know, I've out of, you know, a dozen plus businesses I've started, 2 made a bunch of money, and like 10 were basically total failures.
Yeah.
Right. And I'm still suffering it. Like, we're so terrible at being objective for ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's really been fun for me as I've done CEO coaching, but also had more advisors.
Yeah.
And fellow entrepreneurs, buddies like you that I call and say, hey, I'm thinking about this. And you go, Jess, what about this? And you guys helped me become more objective. My hero, my mentor, and my brother, who I used to run those private equity funds with before, we're getting the band back together, and we're trying to do like boring, reliable, cash flowing real estate this time, right? And this spring we've been ramping up. We've got a $130 million portfolio of multifamily real estate, solid stuff that is off market. We've got access to, and I've been like, oh yeah, we can for sure sell this. Let's swing for the fences. And there were some things about starting this new fund that have been like
big gut check. And I'm like, and I'm realizing all these assumptions about like, I did it in a different regulatory environment. Last time we did this was in Canada, not in the States. Where we're at in the market cycle, this is the longest run we've had in 10 years. At some point, the cycle goes to the other side of the cycle. Yeah.
And these buildings, aren't going to be, the tenants aren't going to be until next year. So I'm making crystal ball predictions today about what the market's going to be like a year from now.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of people who made a lot of money being with the crystal ball, right?
And that's, I think, the key with all entrepreneurship. It is inherently risky. Like, it is... I don't want to make it sound like I only take very safe risks. I'm constantly taking risks that stretch me, but I think it's just that difference between like there's always that risk, but it's like being reasonable with your risk and at least admitting that it's there, and knowing that it's there and knowing how you're going to kind of try and counterbalance it. And people who just are like, hey, I think that's one of the disservices we do to students is we're saying, hey, you should create the next Facebook out of college. And it's like, hey, swing for the fences on your very first time at bat. Swing as hard as you can.
Do you know, like, I've basically had to lie to myself for months now about, like, how confident I am this is a good idea.
Yeah.
And, like, 2 weeks ago, finally, I was, like, willing to get honest, get to that place of radical self-honesty. And I just called my partner. I'm like, I'm not comfortable. What's the smallest thing we can do to verify all these assumptions we're making, because it's going to cost a lot to get a fund like that going, just in legal fees, and 6 months back and forth with the SEC, right? So instead, we're just going to syndicate little $1 million tranches of it, and instead of starting with $130 million, our first one, we're gonna get like $300,000 for the down payment.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And if that goes according to plan, maybe we'll try to sell 3 at once or 10 at once or something. Yep. And hopefully this gets back to us acquiring the entire portfolio, and we've been offered some other properties and stuff. But it's funny how, and I'd love your insight on this. Why do you think it's so easy for me to spot this when other people talk about it? And then here I am lying to myself for literally, multiple months.
Yeah. I think there's several things, and this is, I think, one, we over idolize billionaires. We think that billionaires are like the smartest people in the world. They know everything. And you look at people like Mark Zuckerberg. Mark Zuckerberg is a person. He's smart in some ways, but he also says stupid stuff. Like, he said 20-year-olds are smarter than 40-year-olds. That's idiotic. But he was at the time 20 years old trying to justify how smart he was. And so I think that's like a part of the problem is we over-idolize these people. We think that they know everything. Warren Buffett's a super smart guy, but he's just a guy. Like, he's not a god.
And talk about somebody who stair-stepped along the way.
He started at the bottom and he just worked his way up. And now he's taking risks that had he taken them even 10 years ago would have been stupid. But now he's taking bigger risks and he's stretching himself and he's going after bigger things, like all great entrepreneurs. But I think that that's just we over-idolize people who have made it and think that they know everything. Like, you even watch Shark Tank, you watch all these VCs. You talk to VCs and they say, man, I totally missed it on, Allbirds, or I missed it on Away, or I missed it on Casper. They pitched me and I decided to not go with them. Or I decided to go with them and I'm surprised it worked. We just think that because these people have been successful or because an entrepreneur has been successful, they know everything. And I think also part of that over-idolization we then think that the end goal is being a billionaire. And I think a big part of my entrepreneurial career has just been that realization that, like, hey, you don't need $1 billion to be happy, and money does not make you happy. I've learned that. But
being
also,
broke
like,
isn't all it's cracked up to be.
Yeah.
But once you're comfortable, then it just becomes more of a game, right?
Well, and that's what I've noticed is, like, I even had, like, a really great mentor where I was talking about, like, ramping up the agency and, like, how big do I want to grow it? And he was like, well, you know, do you want to go work for these big, if you want to go after these really big clients, do you want to be getting calls on, like, every Saturday, every Sunday? Do you want to be, like, on call at all hours? Or are you happy with kind of where you're at? And I realized, like, I love my clients. I love working with them. I love being around them. And I love the kind of what we're able to help them do. And I don't need to look at someone else and say, oh, you know, look at Chiat Day or Whedon Kennedy. Like, I want to be them. And instead, I've just learned to be comfortable with, like, this is who I am. This is what I'm great at. I'm great at helping startups go from, you know, a good startup to a great startup and help them with that rapid growth. And I'm not going to be someone else, you know. And so I think that's a key part.
Doesn't life get easier when we quit trying to be somebody else?
Yeah. Like just, you know, one of my guys always quotes, I think it's Dolly Parton, who says, like, know who you are and then do it on purpose. And and that's, like, the key to life. And I think that's really true. And so I think that's a big part of it. As people who are considering being an entrepreneur or even just are a leader in their organization, it's important to remember that you don't have to, like, think of why you want to get to things. Like, I think a lot of entrepreneurs want to become billionaires, and it's like, when I ask people, like, well, why do you want to be a billionaire? Or why do you want to be, you know, the next Steve Jobs? It's usually about ego. Because really, you don't need that much money. Like, billionaires don't even know what to do with their money. They have so much money. It's like, I don't know what to do. And billionaires give back in a lot of ways. They're reinvesting in businesses. So I'm not criticizing them. I'm just saying I think we have this kind of overemphasize this, like, that's the sign of a successful entrepreneur. For me, I love the fact that, like, I mean, I'm running a marketing agency. I love what I do. I love who I work with. I'm grateful every day for what I get to do. And I think that that's great. Like, I don't need to be doing something bigger.
I love
per
this,
se, you know?
Shane, because, like, I still want to be a billionaire and join the Giving Pledge with Warren Buffett or something, right? But it is interesting when you start realizing, I don't know, it's so easy to say there's more to life than money. Yeah. But when you're an entrepreneur and your buddies always talk about money, it's pretty easy to think about money a lot.
Yeah.
And if you're, like, the breadwinner for your home and all these things, right?
Yeah.
And
well, then I watched go ahead.
Well, I got kind of a tentative offer from a client about a month ago, where you know, salary is a few $100,000, and I would get immediate equity in their fund.
Yeah.
And then I realized, like, and I'm going to have to keep commuting an hour a day forever. And the whole reason we just bought this house up in the mountains is for me to spend time with my kids as they're entering these teenage years. Yeah. And, like, did it really fit my whole life? Because it was it was kind of nice. And it didn't even turn into a full offer in the end of it. But it was like this, it was this real mental exercise because it seemed like it was going to be. And so, like, and it was tough because it's like instant money. There would be some cachet. They've got kind of a reputation, you know. So it would be kind of cool to have told my friends I'm now a partner at this $1 billion plus firm, fund, right? Yeah. And I don't know. Maybe if it was a real offer, I would have been interested for a time or something like that. Yeah. Like you talked about in and out, whatever. But it did make me think, like, okay, this really doesn't match a bunch of the long-term goals that me and my wife and our family have, and I say I'm so committed to. Yeah. Right? I think we're going to cut it off here for part 2, but please tune in to part 3. We're going to keep the conversation going. Well, that's it for the episode. One other thing I wanted to tell you about, if you remember the guys from Convoy in episodes back, Ken Free and Trent Mano, I went on one of their CEO trips to New York, and I met a guy named Brent Thompson, very successful entrepreneur. He was former CEO of Jive Communications, big company now, I think $300 or $400 million.
anyways, he started a new company called blipbillboards.com. I'm super stoked they're a sponsor now. But I remember a year and some ago when I met him, I thought it was genius. Instead of having to buy 6 months or a year's worth of billboard for thousands of dollars, you can buy 8 seconds at a time for like 10 or 20 cents. You pick what billboard you want it on, what time of day you want it to run. And it just puts so much power in the hands of marketers and CEOs who want to try something and see if it works. You can buy as many or as few as you want, change it as many times as you want. I think now our podcast is being advertised on billboards in like 18 different states because we have these guys as sponsors. We're pretty excited about it. Hope you check out blipbillboards.com. Thanks.